Before starting the video, make sure to smash that like button. Do it now, it only takes a second to do it, and hit the subscribe button and the bell to turn on notifications so you can be informed whenever I upload new Chronicles. Also, visit my website, that is tpchronicles.com. There you can read articles and see videos that cannot be uploaded on YouTube. You don't want to miss those videos. The link is in the description box below. Also, join me on Facebook, Twitter, IG, TikTok, social platforms. If you are down with the campaign, type CN, which stands for Chronicle Nation, in the comment section. Upon that note, let's get into this next video, and it goes like this.
And a lot of the industrial revolution had moved on. There was a lot of very tall brick chimneys that had to be felled. And so these demolition companies would come in and devise a method whereby they could literally make a structure collapse on its own footprint, and to avoid damage to neighboring properties or to avoid damage to people or the environment. You know, power lines, all sorts of other external features that need to be preserved. And what I saw on WTC 7 was the same. My initial thoughts after the initial shock were that it didn't have a plane fly into it. It didn't have any major debris dropped onto it from towers 1 and 2, which are much taller, twice as tall. And it looked to me as if, having had the whole day of preparation, that somebody had devised a method of demolishing Tower 7 in a safe manner in that World Trade Center complex. That's what I felt.
Yeah, it looks exactly like a controlled demolition. So from what you're saying, if a terrorist wants to try to bring down a building, it doesn't sound like just getting some jet fuel and lighting it around some beams or around a column is going to do the trick. Because this is the excuse that the other side uses to justify NIST not sharing the input data on its computer models. I think there was even a court case that said, yeah, terrorists could get the information and figure out how to bring down a building. Well, really? You just start a fire and run? That's not really complicated stuff to think of here, if that were true. But so it wasn't difficult for you to sign this petition. But because you are such, so involved in the engineering profession, and you're involved in these organizations, it's the Institution of Civil Engineers and the Institution of Structural Engineers over there in the UK. You said that when you signed the petition, you said that you tried to talk to them or members about this. Can you tell us that story? What was it like trying to bring this information to your colleagues?
Yeah. So before I started talking to my colleagues in the profession, one of the things I did was to try and research exactly how these buildings were built and designed. I wanted to know the mechanisms that were looked at for the design of these multi-story, because having designed multi-story buildings myself, I know that there are vertical gravity forces and there are lateral forces that act on a building, either through the environment or through such events as planes hitting buildings. So my initial inquiry to myself was, let's have a look at the design. Let's have a look at what the original designers were thinking of and what load combinations, what load cases they considered. And so I researched, and I found that the basic layout of the structure, I found drawings. Of course, in those days, it was more difficult to find things online, but eventually, after several years, I found drawings and what you'd call blueprints in the wider world. structural drawings that, to me, to allow me to back work and look at the calculations or look at the thinking behind the original engineers' designs, and to work out what made these buildings stand up, and consequently what would make these buildings fall down. And so what I found was that the World Trade Center buildings were actually robustly designed. They had the two towers, 1 and 2, were designed as a external cage, if you like, which provided lateral stability. And then there was an internal core, although in the more conventional sense, when I design a multi-story building, I design a building with a central core. Usually the lift shafts or the stair shafts are designed as the main lateral stability measure to stop a building from toppling over. And the vertical columns and beams or structures or trusses, in the case of World Trade Center 1 and 2, provide the means for transferring the dead loads and the live loads that are associated with each of the building floors, or even the plant floors at the top of the buildings, and taking loads down to the foundations. Now, as a structural engineer, the most efficient way of designing a building is to take the loads, the vertical loads, and also any lateral loads that are being imposed on a building safely and in the most direct route down to the foundations, where there's a lot more stabilizing forces to get the loads down to the ground in the most efficient manner. So what we do is, we, as a structural engineer, we design systems of braced or beams, columns, vertical, horizontal bracing systems, which allow the safest and easiest methods of transferring loads down to the foundations. So in the case of these 3 buildings, I looked at that and I couldn't really see what would cause such major collapses in a building. Like I said before, as structural engineers, we always build in redundancies. We have several different structural systems that allow different load paths to occur, such that if in the event of a collapse, the worst case scenario is a partial collapse. It's unfeasible to design a building that can have a weakness such that it can completely collapse. It's just so I did my research over several years. I looked at drawings, I looked at calculations, whatever I could find on the internet, and then I went searching for answers. So the first port of call was to talk to my institutions and to talk to colleagues and to canvass opinions as to what other professionals like me thought about 9/11. And what I found was that there was a great reluctance of people to talk openly about what had happened. And I felt that this was another smoking gun, that people were either afraid to put their professional necks on the line, or wanting to stand up above the parapet and possibly criticize what they had seen on their TV screens and what had been reported, and to show that there was something else going on. And I found that there was a great reluctance all the way through. I mean, I kept trying for a number of years to try and find people that were like-minded, open-minded, as to understanding what had caused. Because my overall concern was that as a structural engineer, my pencil and my pen is like a gun. I can design, I can do a calculation with an error that could potentially kill people. So I have to make sure that whatever I do as a calculation or as a drawing, as a design, has to be not only safe but ultra safe, with respect to not only structural engineering theory, but also the design codes that have been developed throughout many, many years, with lots and lots of collaboration, professional collaboration. We end up with codes and standards which ensure that we as engineers do not have dangerous pens and pencils in our hands that could potentially kill people. So I've always taken this as almost like doctors have this do no harm policy. In my case, I've always felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders every time I put pen to paper, and every time I've come up with a design concept. The first thing to do is to make sure that your design is safe. And so, given all those things, it's very difficult to get people to understand that there was something else going on other than normal, safety in design principles being put in hand. And I found it very galling that my professional institutions literally were closing the shutters on any discussion on alternative possibilities for the collapse of WTC 1, 2, and 7. I just found it very, very difficult I kept knocking on the door, but I found it very difficult to actually go in and find any number of people, any number of my fellow colleague professionals, even entertain the idea that this was something other than an act of terrorism.
Did they debate you on it? Did they debate you and say that the NIST report is hunky-dory, or did they just want to shut down discussion and bury the whole talk of it?
I think one of the things that we have to consider is that as professionals, we are usually very tied up in our projects. I myself spent many, many years working 12-hour shifts on the current projects that I was involved in. So there's always a requirement to do projects quickly and faster than the last one and the one before. So there's always a full agenda, if you like, in terms of my professional work. And I think my colleagues were the same. So when we are discussing designs such as 9/11, it's all done in our own time. It's all done under our own steam. So having that open dialogue with people is not so straightforward. And I don't believe that many people in my profession have actually even taken the trouble to look at the NIST reports, to question the conclusions that they've arrived at. I think I'm probably one of the very few professionals, professional structural engineers, that have taken the trouble to look at these reports and to critique them. I found that there was very little opportunity in my professions in my institutions to even debate openly the possibilities, and quite often one gets labeled a conspiracy theorist if one doesn't toe the normal lines of inquiry, as it were, and the normal explanations that were given by governments that, hey, this is what happened, these are the reasons, and these are the reports upon which this is based. So yes, I did find a lot of frustration that my fellow professions weren't able to open up and discuss alternative theories, alternative engineering possibilities as to what caused these buildings to collapse and to, unfortunately, kill so many people. And I believe that people are continuing to die because of 9/11, the after effects, asbestos, other materials that were used in the buildings, the dust that was inhaled by all the fire attendants on the day, and subsequently all the people. So I feel a lot of dread and humanity within myself that there hasn't been sufficient open dialogue on a professional level to discuss and to put aside possible alternative explanations as to what happened.
Yeah, well, hence why we have this show, hence why we have AE 9/11 Truth existing in the first place. And that's a point I always drive home. All of the cancers and illnesses that came to the first responders and other people around the site on September 11th, that is a direct consequence of those controlled demolitions. I'm not going to mince words. Because of those controlled demolitions, that is why those people are dying and why they have trouble going up the steps without having to stop and take a few extra breaths. So for them, it's still happening all the time. It's why this issue is so important still 20 years after the event took place. And you mentioned saying that your pencil is like a gun. As an engineer, you have a responsibility because you can do harm if you don't do your job right, just like a doctor. It reminds me, there was a video I saw, I think this was before 9/11, this happened. In Israel, there was a wedding, and there was some, I think they had him in the attic or something. I can't remember all the details of the story, but there was a huge wedding reception. People were dancing, and all of a sudden they fall right through the floor. They captured it on video. It was a horrifying thing to watch. And I remember following this because it had such an impact on me, seeing the initial reports. And the authorities over in Israel went and got the engineer right away, grabbed him, and we're holding him to account. You see this in other countries, but it just seems here in the United States. I mean, we point out obvious flaws in the NIST report, and them trying to, give us an explanation for why these buildings came down, especially World Trade Center 7. I mean, they leave out important structural features, and it's just like, oh, that's not a big deal. And people just go about their days, go about their ways, and we don't get justice for all the people that died. We don't get the truth for that. So we've got some major problems here in the United States with accountability. Now, a question I want to ask you, because this is interesting to me. You live over in Vietnam. You are out of the Western world, and there's a different perspective on the other side of the world, given history and all of that. Do you find that the attitude about this issue, if it ever comes up, is any different among the populace of countries like Vietnam or other places that you visited, because it is out of the, I don't know what you call it, the Anglo Empire or whatnot, out of that alliance? Is there any difference?
Well, first of all, I should say that I've only started living in Vietnam after I retired in October 2020. I have been associated with Vietnam for the best part of 2 decades. My wife is Vietnamese, so I met my wife virtually 22 years ago to the day when I first started working in Vietnam on a project known as the first refinery project in Vietnam. Now, talking about the people, you must realize that Vietnam is a socialist republic. It is a one-party state. What the leaders say goes. There isn't much open debate. The freedom of press is quite limited. So as a foreigner living here, albeit 6 months at a time, because that's what my visa allows me. As a foreigner, one must be very careful not to rock any unnecessary boats in the system. I am literally living here as a guest. Yes, I'm sitting in my own house, but in terms of on paper, although this house belongs to me, it doesn't. It belongs to my wife, as it were. But I have sufficient legal recourse should the unlikely event happen that my wife and I separated or whatever. So
wake up. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I am a pastor that see the wolves, and I am warning you from the rooftop where they at, and they right here in front of you. Cut it off. The wicked will receive their reward at the coming of King Jesus. Peace.